Good morning and afternoon for those on the East Coast. This is Dylan Bowders, Solutions Engineer with RapidScale. Today we're talking about some differentiators, quote unquote, selling to the techies. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes, waiting for people that are joining the call. So we'll get started here in just a moment. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're a couple minutes after the hour. Again, if you've joined since I gave the quick intro a few minutes ago, good morning and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. This is Dylan Bowders, Senior Solutions Engineer for selling, or for RapidScale, and what we're covering today is selling to the techies, which ultimately is an overview of what we consider our differentiators, things that either a good portion of our competition or of the industry isn't doing, or not many of them do. So hopefully this will be helpful for all the partners out there that are wondering, when do I position RapidScale, or what kind of things can I talk to my customers and prospects about that help get their attention. And hopefully we've got some good ones here for you today. As always, the webinar is being recorded. It'll be sent out after the webinar so that you guys can reference it down the road. It'll be sent within 24 hours. If you have any questions, or if you don't have access in the partner portal where it'll be posted, please email marketing@rapidscale.net. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, all of your phones are currently muted, and they will stay that way. But if you can send over any questions in the chat, in the GoToMeeting chat, please do so. Those will be fielded by Summer Fagoni, our Marketing Director. And if she's not able to answer those during the webinar, we'll address any of those after we get done with the slide deck. All right, here's the agenda. We're going to go over our pre-sales process and how extensive that is. We're going to go through migration services. We're going to go through post-migration optimization and what that means. Our desktop as a service, which we certainly feel like sets us apart given our involvement and success with that particular product and how it pertains to compliance and security and mobility. Our 100% SLA. A lot of people think we're crazy for doing that, but I'll go into details about why we do that. The fact that we include internet, not that we just provide it, but we include it. And then just a real quick overview of our security portfolio that we're continuing to evolve. We've already had some technical webinars on that. You can certainly reference that in our partner portal as well if you want to go back and review that webinar. So we'll just discuss those at a high level as well. All right, pre-sales. This ultimately is where I come into play. This is my responsibility as a solutions engineer. I'm challenged with understanding all of our products, how they work together, understanding the customer's requirements, not just from a technical perspective, but a business perspective, and then putting together a solution of those different components out of our toolbox for a solution that not only is going to meet their needs, but is supportable. I think that's super important. A lot of times we'll get questions, can you support this? Can you support that? And I think we do a good job of trying to meet those needs, but we won't do anything. We won't just support anything because we need to be able to support it, obviously through the course of the term and be successful with that. We're very focused on our customer satisfaction, and we can't be good at that if we try and do everything. So pre-sales consultation, If any of you have been on the phone with any of our solutions engineers, myself maybe, you know that we like to ask a lot of questions. We like to really understand what the customer is trying to accomplish. We don't just sit with what they say. We might ask some challenging questions back. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to come up with what's going to be best for the business. That's considered a consultative approach, I think. We certainly don't charge for that. And we'll have as many calls as we need to with as many different parties. Maybe it's the IT director the first day or the first call. Maybe we include some of the director's team to do a deeper dive. Once we qualify the technical solution, maybe we have some calls with executives, C-level, C-suite, and discuss the value prop to the business. We'll go through all of those different levels and make sure that we're putting the right solution in place. The other thing that we do in the pre-sales process, if it's applicable, we certainly will sell some things and position some products that don't require a statement of work. But in situations where it's a complex solution, if there's specific requirements or asks by the prospect or customer that we need to capture into a process document, and definitely when there's a migration involved, we'll write up a statement of work. Some of the statement of work is canned language. Some of it is very specific to the asks of the customer. Ultimately, what that means is we're capturing those pre-sales discussions. We're getting on the same page with the prospect or the customer, making sure that we're all on the same page of what's desired, what's required, what the end state should look like, and then we sign off on that on both sides. It's also an opportunity to communicate to our implementation team what those conversations were. If you've dealt with, if you've ever dealt with a provider that has complex solutions and you have these conversations in the pre-sales process, and then we get to an implementation team, it's not the same people, and they don't know what those conversations were. So this is an opportunity for us to document some of that and translate it to the implementation. It's a good segue to migration services. Migration services, I think, really do set us apart. That's not to say that nobody else does them. I certainly have could name some companies that don't, and I'm not. But some other companies will say they do migration services. They use third-party providers that maybe are in the region of the customer or prospect, and that's not a very comprehensive story. It's a very disjointed presentation when you try and bring in third parties to talk about migration services, and then what's that handoff going to look like once the migration is done to the service provider. What are the fees? Usually companies that focus on migration services have to charge a decent amount of money because they're only making money on those professional services fees. They can't amortize any of that into the ongoing services. So there's a lot of benefits to leveraging the same company for migration services that are actually providing the services long term. So there are one-time fees for migration. That does add value to the service. If a customer says, well, the other company is waiving them, I would be a little suspicious of their ability to execute on migration services. There are real people doing work. There's, in some cases, real licenses that have to be paid for, and there's value to that. We have to sell that value. We have to position and ensure that the prospect or customer isn't just trying to get a free ride and understands that there's value in paying for the service. It's going to be done right. We try to complete migrations within 60 days. That's not to say that it always takes 60 days, and that certainly isn't to say that any size migration will be done in 60 days. We target 45 to 60 days. That's because we have to build the environment. We have to integrate replication technology into the source environment that we're migrating from, and depending on the scenario, it's going to be different technology. We have to begin that replication of data depending on the size of the pipe at the source location. That's going to impact how long it takes to do that. And I'll talk about a little bit more about the specific methodology around migration, so you can understand why it doesn't happen in a week on the next slide. But again, we try and target 45 to 60 days as our standard language on that. And depending on the size of the migration, we'll send people on site for, a lot of times I end up on site, my counterparts end up on site to do the due diligence process, write the statement of work for the actual migration. Sometimes we'll send engineers that are involved in the process on site to do an even deeper dive, gain access to the environment, establish connectivity and replication. And then for the actual cut of services, depending on what the services are, again, we can have engineers on site for that. That's not built into the cost, but it's something that we'll talk about in the pre-sales process, and of course, we'll account in our non-recurring charges for migration services. I also want to mention, it's mentioned at the top here, the migration services team and the implementation team and the ongoing support engineering team is the same group of people. They might be spread out between Irvine, California and Raleigh, North Carolina, but they are the same team. They work together on a daily basis, and there's a lot of continuity to be gained from leveraging, again, the same team. And we intend to scale that way long term, because it's very successful when it comes to customer satisfaction. So what's our methodology? I've talked a bit about this, but here it is in black and white. We prepare, and that's where we'll do a deeper dive. We'll do a kickoff call internally first. We'll do a kickoff call with the appropriate points of contact, technical, business, with the customer. Of course, we'll include the partner if you desire to be included, and we'll document what maybe wasn't completely documented in the pre-sales process. We usually do a pretty decent job of that in order to put the actual solution together. We'll provision the resources that ultimately are being targeted for the migration in our environment, or if it's Office 365, for instance, in that portal, if it's Encapsula in that portal, if it's ShareFile in that portal. And a lot of times, most times, we're leveraging our infrastructure, so we'll have to provision those firewall services, vCPU, VRAM, storage, etc. Then we'll install data replication. That'll be Zerto, never fail. We've been moving away from double-take, but that's potentially still something that we would leverage depending on the scenario. Install those agents, integrate that technology into the hypervisor in the case of Zerto. Configure the replication, begin the replication, and then once that's started, we'll be able to establish a time frame for when we believe that will complete, so that we can actually schedule our initial verification of that data. So we'll do that verification, ensure that the failover process works properly. We usually learn something that we've missed with that initial verification. We'll adjust accordingly, and then we'll schedule the final migration. Again, potentially sending engineers on site or an engineer on site, depending on the scenario, to assist with whatever the situation is. And then there's a detailed handoff that'll happen from the professional services team to the in-life customer support team. And I know that kind of sounds like it contradicts what I said in the previous slide, where it's the same engineers. It is the same engineers, but in the implementation phase, we use project managers. All communication during the process of implementation happens with those project managers. The handoff happens to the technical team's contacts. So instead of contacting the project manager for implementation, they'll contact the support team post-implementation. And again, all the same engineers in the back end are working the environments, but we'll be looping in the support team to start handling those requests via our ticketing system, via phone call, via email. And we'll go into some more detail about this, but post-migration optimization and consolidation, there's different ways to go about this. We certainly have our opinion on what is usually successful, and it does depend on the source environment. It depends on what the desire is for an end state, but we're very flexible. I want to make sure that that's the theme that you take away from this around post-migration, is that we're very flexible about what that end state and ultimately what the end contract looks like. We want to build the proposal, the quote, the monthly recurring contract. We want to build that as close to accurate as possible. But at the end of the day, we're able to be flexible about what that looks like to start the term. So let's say we have 25 widgets in the initial proposal, and once we've gone through after migrating and forklifting the environment, we decide that we can consolidate some of those servers or some of those services into a single VM, or we decide we want to split them up. Ultimately, those 25 widgets may be 20 widgets, and what we can do then is adjust the contract to show that, and at the end of the day, we're actually using 20 widgets, and that will be our baseline for the contract going forward. Again, we're the point of this is to communicate to you guys that we're flexible about what that looks like. It's not sign on the dotted line and this is your number and this is it for the duration of the term. We have an opportunity to adjust that post-migration for the duration of the contract. A little bit more about that. Specific to roles, it's possible that after the migration, and the reason that we typically recommend forklifting is because in most cases we have more flexibility to consolidate servers and services once we're in our environment. That isn't always the case on the source environment. And if there was a desire to consolidate in the source environment, it probably would have been done already. So it usually is because we're migrating to our environment that gives us the opportunity and flexibility to consolidate those services. So for instance, SQL databases. It's possible that there could be 5, 6, 7 different SQL database virtual machines all operating independently. We can establish a cluster of SQL always-on databases, move those databases into that always-on cluster, ultimately providing a reduced amount of resources, more sharing of resources, and a more resilient environment for those SQL databases. For file servers, there could be multiple map drives from multiple machines. We can either consolidate that one down to one single virtual machine, or we can position something like ShareFile, where we can actually offload maybe several terabytes worth of data from our environment and move it into a solution where it's a flat cost and unlimited data. And I'll repeat that, it's unlimited data for a flat rate. So that's an excellent opportunity to reduce some costs potentially, but significantly increase mobility, security, and enterprise file sync and share for those file services. Usually when we're evaluating the source environment, there are things like virus protection, virtual machines controlling that environment, backups that will take up a lot of space, and some additional roles, VMware, vCenter servers. We don't forklift those. We don't move those because we're replacing those services with our own. In the sense of backups, we would replace the current backups with our own. That doesn't mean we have to, but a lot of times that's a good opportunity to consolidate. Email archiving, Exchange, VDI, just some additional items that we can be more efficient with in our environment and consolidate post-migration. Desktop as a service. If you've noticed for more than a week, you've probably heard that we pride ourselves in our ability to provide a virtual desktop environment geographically around the US and around the world with our data centers that are also in Amsterdam and Hong Kong. We were Citrix Partner of the Year last year for growth and enablement. We plan to continue to be very high on Citrix's radar, and we're even expanding our desktop as a service offering to include VMware Horizon. I'm not going to go into details on those different reasons why, but the point is that we want to be able to accommodate different scenarios and ultimately provide what's best for the customer at the end of the day. So the value prop here is considerable. We have entire slide decks on desktop as a service, but it reduces capital expenditure. It isolates data into a secure environment. It makes that data more mobile because it's in an isolated environment that's accessible from anywhere. And we include encryption at rest, and the product inherently includes encryption in flight. There are very few customers, I find, that don't realize a good portion of the value props when it comes to desktop as a service. That doesn't mean they're ready for it. That doesn't mean that their users are ready for some type of change and they might be adverse to that. There are certainly reasons why customers will be a little hesitant to jump into a desktop as a service platform. It's usually a crawl, walk, run, where we might do email first into the cloud. We might do file sync and share into the cloud. We might move their infrastructure and application servers into the cloud. Desktop usually is last, but there's a really good value prop why it should probably follow the servers and actually be migrated with the servers. And with conversations that with partners like you, conversations that we can have with them, we can communicate to them how that platform can really benefit their company. It's rare that they'll come to us and say, hey, we need desktop as a service. because they haven't been told about it. They haven't been sold on why. But that's, again, where you guys come in and where we come in. 100% SLA. There's not a whole lot of details into this. There's two different perspectives of why we provide 100% SLA. For the technical people out there, the first thing that comes to mind is you can't actually achieve 100% uptime. And that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we have a business level agreement that the availability of the virtual machines and the availability of our internet connectivity has a business guarantee of 100%. And I'll say when, not if, because there's humans involved. There's acts of nature involved that will certainly impede at some places, and that's why very few people actually put 100% SLA out there. So when there's an issue, from a business perspective, there are industry standard credits that can be issued. The customer can request those. We'll evaluate the scenario, we'll evaluate the services, and determine what those credits are. More importantly, that 100% SLA from our side creates a considerable amount of accountability, not only in the design of the infrastructure, but also in the support and remediation of the infrastructure when there is an issue. Our engineers, our architects are completely aware of this SLA, and they realize when there's an issue, there's no buffer that the company has before credits are being paid. There's no consideration of, well, we've got some time here, let's make sure that let's not rush things. Not that we rush things, but we're absolutely intending to get that, not only design the service so it's available as much as possible, it's resilient as possible, but that we get the service back online and keep it online. I think it's really important for us to have that communication and communicate that value down to the prospects and customers, that it's not, we don't just throw it out there. We have meat behind the SLA when it comes to the industry standard credits, but it does generate that technical accountability on the back end when it comes to the RapidScale team that supports this environment. Internet's included. Call us lazy, regardless. We provide 100% SLA on our internet, and we also don't charge for it. I don't like to call it free. I think that could cheapen the service. We have multiple 10 gig upstreams in each of our facilities. We'll add additional connectivity as we need to in those facilities. We own, or I should say we manage our own autonomous system number. We have and manage and own our own IP space. So we're not tied to any specific upstream provider. We can migrate on and off of upstream providers at will and be completely seamless to the end users that's consuming that internet connectivity. We actually are implementing a metering process so that we can show graphs based on the actual usage. We can do that today from the interface of the firewall and things of that sort, but some kind of a central repository for collecting that metering. But we have no intentions of ever charging for our internet service. It's included in the services that the customers subscribe to. And it's also a commodity. A lot of companies will nickel and dime and probably spend more back-end processing time processing those upgrades and processing those billing increments than just having it a differentiator so that they can actually be more competitive. So there you go. Internet's included. And the last topic for selling to the techies is our cloud security portfolio. I don't remember if we had this specific diagram in our cloud security tech webinar that we did. Again, you can reference that in the partner portal. This is an opportunity or an attempt to communicate our different security solutions and where they would fit, so you can kind of visualize and conceptualize where we would position some of these items. I'll start from the top down. If we're leveraging desktop as a service, if we're leveraging Citrix, the point of having the Citrix Secure Access on the far right-hand side there is just to communicate that we have encryption in flight for any type of access to the desktop environment. No VPN is needed to increase security for that traffic that's in flight, whether it's the HTML5 browser that's over SSL. We have the Citrix receiver, which has its own encryption via HDX, iOS applications, every method of access. Of course, I didn't mean to exclude Android, but any method of access into the desktop environment, whether it's desktop or Zen app for streaming applications, is encrypted in flight. We can also add Duo two-factor authentication to that request so that when a user is accessing that desktop or application, they get prompted for a second set of not really credentials, but additional code that would be sent to their cell phone. So that we're not only asking the user to give us something that they know, which could fall into the hands of the wrong people, or be brute force attacked or something of that sort, disgruntled employee. We can also enforce an authentication mechanism with something that we have. So it's something we know, something we have, and that would be your cell phone with a code. Moving to the left is Mimecast. We've done tech webinars specific to Mimecast. It's email security. It also is an opportunity to take the target, which is an MX record. That's very easy for an attacker to determine. Everybody on this call has an email address, or multiple email addresses. Your company has an email address. Your customers and prospects have email addresses. And with that domain, we can very easily determine exactly where their email is hosted, unless they have a service like Mimecast, where we can move the target and the realization and exposure of the infrastructure of that mail server somewhere else. Now, again, if you move that to the cloud, if you move it to RapidScale, that's a different consideration. But Mimecast also does a fantastic job with things like targeted threat protection, attachment protection, encrypted email, business continuity, which is not really a security thing, but business continuity. And something that a lot of people don't really realize is that Mimecast also provides DDoS mitigation. So by implementing the Mimecast service, and if you have an on-site, or if a customer or prospect has an on-site Exchange server, prior to Mimecast, they're exposed and vulnerable to a DDoS attack, because we can easily determine where that server is. By putting Mimecast in place, not only are we eliminating that exposure, but we're also putting a solution in place that ultimately will mitigate some kind of a DDoS attack that could target the MX records, because at this point, the MX records are pointing to Mimecast. Incapsula is not a whole lot unlike Mimecast, except it's for web security. It is one of the industry-leading DDoS mitigation companies. It is the industry leader when it comes to web application firewall. So if you want trying to maintain HIPAA, PCI compliance, best practice for protecting your web applications, load balancing, and also accelerating the delivery of the web page to the end user around the world with 38 points of presence, the Incapsula product is fantastic for that. We can actually do a POC with Incapsula. So if a customer is interested in trying it out, no obligation, 14 days, we can get them kicked off with a trial for Incapsula. We can talk about Incapsula for an hour. We also did a webinar, tech webinar on that, so you can reference that in the partner portal. Citrix Mobile is great for mobile device management, mobile application management. It can enforce policies on remote devices like cell phones, laptops, Mac OS, Windows, iOS, Android, asset inventory, encryption, remote wipe. This is an opportunity for us to continue to gain control for the company around where data goes, and if a device is lost or stolen, gives us control and the ability to remote wipe and locate the device potentially. Zen Mobile is a very extensive product. It's got multiple levels of feature sets based on what's needed. So that's something we can definitely dive into at some point. But that's one of our security products, or one of the products I consider in our security portfolio. At the border or edge of a customer's environment, and in most cases, if we're talking about our services, of course, that would be our data center. We leverage a virtual Fortinet typically in that scenario. We're also working on bringing Palo Alto into our security portfolio as well. That'll likely be an enhanced firewall service, given that it's a bit of a more mature next generation firewall. Fortinet is a very full-featured firewall. We've had a lot of success with that. We're very comfortable with Fortinet, but we're going to be bringing in Palo Alto as an option as well. And then Alien Vault, and a lot of times I'll leverage the analogy of a neighborhood, a house, and that kind of scenario when talking about some of these security products. Fortinet and Palo Alto would be the lock on your door. Without something like Encapsula or Mimecast in the cloud externally stopping threats being delivered into the hosting environment or to the front door of your house, essentially what you're saying is, I'm fine having thousands of people come to my front door with a key, trying their key, and hoping that they can't get in. And without something like Alien Vault, if they get in, don't really care to know. If they're loud, I might hear them. Otherwise, it's, I don't have a budget to install a security system. I don't have a budget to live in a gated community with a guard that can validate every single person coming into the neighborhood. Encapsula, Mimecast, some of those products that we position out in the cloud would be that security guard at the perimeter of your neighborhood saying, you are not legitimate and you cannot come in here. Or, I recognize you, you're legitimate, please proceed. Fortinet Palo Alto at the gateway gives you an opportunity and an enforcement around, not just a lock at your door, but the ability also to tie in a doorbell cam and send that to your analysis internally inside the house. Alien Vault gives you every security feature and perspective that you would want from inside the house. Motion sensors, video cameras, glass break sensors, every scenario you can think of if you're inside your house to know if someone was to breach. Alien Vault is that perspective. And we can also tie in feedback from things like the doorbell cam and the lock and the guard at the gate. We can tie in all of those events, all those things that are happening in those external services and gateway services. We can tie those into Alien Vault so that we can intelligently collaborate and correlate those events into a single attempt or attack or malicious activity. And then WebRoot would be, I don't even know how exactly to bring WebRoot into my analogy, but it's antivirus, anti-malware. It's like Symantec. It's installed on a server and gives you the opportunity to determine if there's any kind of malicious code that's been installed on the server. So multi-level approach to security, and that's our portfolio when it comes to cloud security. So again, at the end of the day, what we're trying to communicate here is not just value prop of RapidScale, because there's lots of products that we have. There's lots of things that we can talk about from a technical and perspective around each of these different products, but to kind of focus on some of the things that we believe that we do that are different than at least most of the industry, if not unique to the industry. Any questions that we're not able to answer during the webinar?
Not yet. If you guys have any that you want to chat over really quickly, just use the questions panel.
All right, while we're waiting for those, go ahead and say that we're going to have selling Mimecast. So not necessarily from a technical perspective with Mimecast, but value prop and positioning Mimecast with your prospects and partners. Our Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing, Bob Buchanan, will be running that one on Wednesday, November 1st at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. And with that, if there are any questions, feel free to communicate those over to marketing. You can reach out. Summer will be sending out an email with everyone that attended as well. You can reply back to that email. And then again, in the partner portal, we're going to have this recording available for download, including the other ones that I referenced as well.
We did just get a question for clarification, I believe. So for any services that are offered by RapidScale, the customer does not have to buy additional bandwidth?
That's a good question. For general internet connectivity in our data center, we include that bandwidth. It includes the 100% SLA. And if it's for services that we're selling inside of our facility, yes, it's included. Now, we have services that we sell that we can position outside of our data center. Office 365, Alien Vault, Encapsula, Mimecast. Those services wouldn't really apply to our internet bandwidth. We wouldn't add that line in a quote if we're selling those services outside of our infrastructure. I also want to mention that if the customer has a requirement for private connectivity, MPLS, point-to-point circuits, third-party circuits that aren't VPN, those, of course, would have standard circuit charges that you would procure through either one of the partners here on the phone, or a third party that could provide that circuit. And then on our side, we would have a cross-connect charge. But that would not traverse, in that scenario, our internet traffic. So hopefully that answers your question. There is no need to procure additional connectivity into our facility for general internet connectivity because we provide that at no additional charge.
Great. Then I think that's it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Get 24 minutes of your day back. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you on the next webinar.